Indie News Network, collaborative family of independent content creators. It's co-hosted normally by me, Indie. I'm founder and editor of Indie Left News and Indie Media Today. I got Reef Breland sitting next to me.
At Kennedy News.
Is Andrew Rivera, I'm the Handsome Cynic.
It's Politics is Survival.
My name is Jesse Jett.
It's American Tradition.
What's up, Space Monkeys? Welcome to Political Fight Club. I'm Robert Durden.
I mostly make art for INN.
Big Man Crab Joe. Keep up those great videos.
Hey guys, it's Yeti. Coming at you.
Hello, my name is Lucy from Good Moon Red Wine.
This is Chris Legion.
Keep fighting that good fight out there, guys. I'll talk to you later.
Who are these people?
All right. Good evening, everyone. I don't hear my voice, so it appears to be working at this moment. Appreciate. Looks like there was just a little bit of a delay, so I'm just going to go ahead and try and post this back up on Twitter, and then we'll get into it and see what we can do. Bear with me for just a second, guys, while we get this up. All right. Come join us. All right. Bear with me 1 second here, guys. I appreciate you. All right. So I'm not hearing myself, so it appears to be working at this point. So we're just going to go with it. Thank you again for joining me tonight. Got an interesting show tonight. So with The Sound of Freedom doing well at box office and kind of bringing it to the forefront, what we got going on with child trafficking around the world, I wanted to kind of shed some light on something more local. Well, granted, that stuff's important, and it's great that we can shine a light on that. I wanted to kind of focus that a little bit and actually talk a little bit about child labor in the United States specifically. Over the last couple months ago or so, I just been kind of keeping this in the back of my head and been noticing a concerning trend with child labor growth in America through like legislation, direct legislation, and kind of just the government not really doing much to kind of pump the brakes or really kind of penalize offenders of, bringing up child labor, introducing child labor into their workforce. So it's definitely a super big issue. And as more articles, New York Times is talking about, New Yorker is talking about, some big, publications of record talking about this stuff. So I think, like I said, with Sound of Freedom coming to light, I think now is a good time to talk about it. So that being said, there are, I'm going to kind of frame it, really focus on what's going on in the US these days and kind of dispel the notion a little bit that we're kind of like a beacon of freedom and equal opportunity thing, and kind of demonstrate a little bit about how child labor and the erosion of child rights and making it easier for children to participate in the workforce at younger ages and in more hazardous conditions is not really necessarily a conflict of our system, but unfortunately it's kind of inherent to our system. And I'm going to talk about that more as we go into the show. So it's important to keep in mind that, unfortunately, with the way that child labor is in this country and the way it is for, any imperialist country, is that these things are kind of working as intended. So it's important to keep in mind as I go through this stuff that, you may see stuff like, oh, it's only 100 kids. Oh, it's only like a couple dozen kids. Oh, it's only a few hundred kids. Like, this is a growing trend and there's no pumping the brakes on it. It's not, you can't go backwards on this. There's some stuff saying that like the child labor in the US has actually grown since 2016. So it's actually gotten worse. So we'll get into that a little bit more as we go through it, but it's important to keep in mind that things are going forward and they're probably going to get worse and they're not going to get better. So I just kind of wanted to get ahead of it and kind of show people this collection of stuff that I've been seeing over the last few months and go from there. So to start off, I came across what kind of prompted me to kind of go into this and kind of explore this subject was I saw a Guardian article recently, a little while ago, and just kind of put it into the back of my head that, oh, that's weird. Like the Guardian's kind of an important publication. Why are they talking about this stuff? And didn't really think too much of it, but like I said, with Sound of Freedom, I started to do some more digging, and I wanted to go into this stuff now. So, so to start off with, I wanted to I did have a tweet. I guess I can show that first. I did have a tweet that kind of prompted this that I'll go into. Let me pop that up really quick. Let's see. Okay. So this tweet for me anyway, it kind of did well. So I kind of got the impression that I kind of wanted to run with this a little bit. But this is a headline that I'll get into from Guardian in just a second here. But you can see it says dumb and dangerous U.S. sees surge in efforts to weaken child labor regulations. And as we go through the program, you'll see that this is something that's consistent through a lot of mainstream media publications. So let's get into it a little bit. All right, so we'll start off with the Guardian article, and we'll go from there. Give me 1 second here, guys. Where are you? No, it's not there. No, there it is. Okay. All right. So to start off with, let's start with this Guardian article. Dumb and dangerous USC surge in efforts to weaken child labor. 10 states have rolled back child labor laws recently with a federal bill to allow teens to work in one of the most dangerous industries. So this was written in May. So like a couple months, I guess it's about 3 months now. But since then, it's gone from 10 to 14. And we'll get into that in a little bit here. But just to kind of set the stage that this isn't a joke. This isn't like, one state doing this. This isn't like one industry doing this. This is like big enough now where the Guardian's talking about it, New York Times talking about it, New Yorker's talking about it. Major publications are drawing attention to this. Maybe it's not really getting to mainstream media on TV yet, but it's definitely enough where it's been concerning, and we'll start getting into that stuff. But anyway, to get into this a little bit, this March, a bill was reintroduced in the House and U.S. House and Senate that would allow 16 and 17-year-olds to work in certain mechanized operations in the logging industry under parental supervision. Timber industry groups have strongly backed the legislation. For Wendy Bostwick, the news was a nightmare. Bostwick's son, Cole, who had just turned 18, died in a logging accident in 2014 on a job site in Washington where his father, Tim Bostwick, was also working. Obviously, that was a tragic situation, but someone who does not want to get into logging and someone who does want to get into logging can and should be supervised by their parents. Senator Reich of Idaho, chief sponsor of Future Logging Careers Act, said in an interview, if a child is going into logging, what better way than to start with your family and having your family teach it to you? So that's insane. So you can already see that the framing is really kind of weak with that. So that you'll see that's a common theme with these chucksters trying to erode child labor rights, is they come across as that this is a way to kind of get them real work skills, or like this freaking jokester, this politician said, they can work with their family. But like, can you imagine the family conversations where you have, a young kid, 16-year-old, maybe, at this rate, could be 14 years old in some of these cases, 12 years old in some of these cases, and having family dinner. Oh, how was your 12-hour job at the lumber mill today? That's not the sign of a society that's doing super well. So anyway, to kind of look at that a little bit, we'll bring up the bill and show you guys. And we'll just read through some of it, and you can see for yourself how ridiculous in the framing of this stuff it is. So you can see the Bicameral Future Logging Careers Act. Okay. Idaho's logging industry has long been a family trade, but current law is hampering its future by preventing young men and women from working in their families' businesses. The Future Logging Careers Act would give timber families the same opportunity to pass down their trade that is allotted to family farmers. With the logging industry facing a decline in labor and aging workforce, we must empower the next generation of loggers who are vital for properly managing our forests, supporting rural economies, and maintaining family businesses. I am proud to introduce this legislation that does just that. So imagine being a apparatchik and being excited about introducing child labor into one of the most dangerous industries in the freaking country. That's a categorical fail, in my opinion. And, these guys are trying to tout it. One of the things that libertarians, Republicans, mainly conservatives, but, even some Democrats to some degree, they kind of frame it in a way of kind of giving experience and opportunity. And really, it kind of does the opposite. So I just wanted to show you a little bit with the framing here. Like they try and, like it's a family thing passed down from generations. You're contributing to your society. You're helping grow the economy. You're doing all these great things, but really you're just being a chattel slave for the system. So let's move on a little bit from that. Going on. So we did that. Now, what I want to get into a little bit is actually getting into some of the statistics here. So what I see here is there's the, I think it's called the economic protection industry. Let me pull this up, the EPI. All right. So just to get us started here, this is the Economic Policy Institute. So child labor laws are under attack in states across the country. Amid increasing child labor violations, lawmakers must act to strengthen standards. So this was edited actually recently. So like I said, things that were bad in May or April or March, they're now worse in June and July. So things are moving quickly, and if you frame this in a way where you consider, hey, like they're complaining about inflation, they're complaining about like wages are too high for the actual workers. Introducing these child labor acts, these things that are friendly to industry and hurting child labor, is actually kind of can be looked at as kind of a hidden modifier on inflation, because one of the things that child labor does is it drives down costs by increasing the supply of cheap labor. So, I know I mentioned the kind of dinner discussion earlier, but can you imagine an adult maybe working in the industry for a while, gets fired and replaced by a child maybe 10, 15, 20 years younger than them for the same job for half the pay? What kind of dinner conversations that's going to make for? So let's talk a little bit about this stuff. So this has some good stuff in here. And what I want to get into is some of the summary here. So you can see that, as I said earlier, there were 10 states, now it's 14, and I'm going to go into that stuff in a second. But some of the key findings that we should take a look at is violations of child labor laws and proposals to roll back child labor protections are on the rise in the country. The number of minors employed in violation of child labor laws increased to 37% in the last year, and at least 10 states introduced, now 14, or passed laws rolling back child labor protections in the past 2 years. Attempts to weaken state-level child labor standards are part of the coordinated campaign backed by industry groups intent on eventually diluting federal standards that cover the whole country. Youth labor force participation declines over the past 20 years reflect that a steadily growing share of young people are choosing to complete high school and obtain additional education in order to increase their long-term employability and earnings. Putting off work in order to obtain more skills and education is a positive trend for both individuals and the economy, not one that should be slow to reversed. This is a really important point that I'm going to touch upon again later in the show, but it's extremely important that under the guise with these politicians and lobbyists framing it that it provides opportunity, what they're actually doing is when you have kids, teenagers who are still in high school, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, doing these jobs and doing full-time jobs and doing more than full-time jobs and doing overnight jobs, they tend to have less opportunity because they're not as likely to go off to college. They're not as likely to pursue like a trade school. They're not as likely to go pursue further education. They're more likely to continue in their trade. So in a way, this is sort of, I don't know how to describe it other than it's kind of creating a permanent workforce by taking away the education element and just putting them right into these like heavily industrialized corporations and businesses and stuff, like logging, for instance, meat packing, another one. These really, really, really dangerous jobs tend to be the focus here. So state and federal lawmakers must act to protect and advance the rights of workers of all ages and backgrounds while protecting poor and/or immigrant youth from exploitation. Policy recommendations include raising the minimum wage and eliminating sub-minimum wages for youth. Yes, that's a thing. They actually have sub-minimum wages, and that's like one of the loopholes. Like, oh, we can pay you less money because you're not 18. Ending the two-tiered system of standards for agriculture and non-agriculture work, which from a little bit that I saw is like they can basically have kids as young as 10 working in cornfields and stuff. By law. Enforcing wage and hour laws, passing key immigration reforms, and supporting workers' rights to organize and form unions. So, of course, that's great things, but they're basically illustrating that the trend is kind of the opposite. So let's scroll down a little bit. I want to show you guys this figure. So this is where the 37% increase since 2015, I guess, and the 286% increase. So according to the Department of Labor, the number of minors employed in violation of child labor laws in fiscal year 2022 increased 37% over fiscal year 2021 and 283% over fiscal year 2015. The number of minors employed in violation of hazardous occupation orders increased 26% over fiscal year 2021 and 94% over 2015. In the 6 months prior to March 2023, Department of Labor reported findings from 14 separate investigations into child labor violations. As of February 2023, it was investigating over 600 child labor cases. These numbers represent just a tiny fraction of violations, most of which go unreported and uninvestigated. And that's an important thing to keep in mind as we go through the rest of this, is that I'm mainly focusing on documented labor. So this is kids who by law are allowed to have their rights eroded. That's kind of my focus here. I touch upon a little bit on the child migrant labor crisis as well. But, you know, so much of that, it's very hard to get data on that stuff because they're undocumented. They come over with coyotes, come over, you know, across the border, and very quickly they get lost in the system and get turned into chattel slaves. It's really, really fucking sad. So again, these numbers grossly underestimate the entire extent of how bad these things are, but it is still showing you that things are still looking really fucking bad as we, you know, as the years progress. So let's see. So now I'm going to switch over to the one that they updated. Let me just take a look at this really quick. So let me go ahead and pull up the update, and there's some really good stuff that I want to go over with you guys on that. So let's see. Give me 1 second here. So this is insane. So we'll go through this stuff because this is absolutely crazy. And I want you guys to see that, like, America is not just some, like I said, the beacon on the hill. Like, we are doing some kind of really depraved stuff right now. And like one of the things that you do see with media, like, you know, I saw a Washington Post article that I was going to take, and I just didn't like the framing of it, is like they like to say, like, oh, this conservative state or this red state is doing this. Like, it's important to keep in mind that, you know, the states are still part of this whole country, and that even though it might be, you can make a bad faith argument that it's only really red states that are doing this, where are these major industries like focused? They're not focused all over the country. They're focused in specific states. Okay. And those states are where this legislation is taking place. So it's not like we have meatpacking facilities in 50 states, you know, so it's not really a good faith argument to say, oh, it's just the red states doing this. It's important to keep in mind that it's not really about red versus blue. It's about corporate interests and increasing the labor supply into our economy to lower wages. I know it sounds terrible, but that's literally what's happening here. In the other report that I showed you, we documented how states across the country are attempting. So first, I'll read this from the top. Iowa governor signs one of the most dangerous rollbacks of child labor laws in the country. 14 states have now introduced bills putting children at risk. This is the same report. It's just an addendum because, like I said, things are kind of happening kind of quickly. Where something that happened in March, and now like, oh, we got to update this in June. You know, I'd hate to see what's going to happen in the fall, winter, next year, so on and so forth. I see an accelerating trend, and that's why my radar is going off. So on March 14, give me 1 second here, we documented how states across the country are attempting to weaken child labor protections, just as violations of these standards are on the rise. The trend reflects a coordinated multi-industry push to expand employer access to low-wage labor and weaken child state labor laws in ways that contradict federal protections. I think that's the FLSA, the Federal Labor Standards Administration or something. So these laws that like Iowa and even some other states are introducing actually contradict federal law that actually protects children. So just absolutely unhinged. The trend reflects a coordinated multi-industry push to expand employer access to low-wage labor and weaken state child labor laws in ways that contradict federal protections. And the recent uptick in state legislative activity is linked to longer-term industry-backed goals to rewrite federal child labor laws and other worker protections for the whole country. Okay. Last Friday, this concerted attack on child labor safeguards further expanded. Governor Kim Reynolds of Iowa signed an expansive bill enacting numerous changes to the state's child labor laws, including allowing employers to hire teens as young as 14 for previously prohibited hazardous jobs in industrial laundries, or as young as 15 in light assembly work. So, and the thing about hazardous stuff is when they say hazardous, that means that it's not, you have to be 18 plus usually for hazardous work. So the fact that it's hazardous and that they lowered it under 18 is doubly concerning. Allowing state agencies to waive restrictions on hazardous work for 16 and 17-year-olds in a long list, like I said, and dangerous occupations, including demolition, roofing, excavation, and power-driven machine operation. Setting hours to allow teens as young as 14 to work in 6-hour nightly shifts during the school year. Allowing restaurants to have teens as young as 16 to serve alcohol, and limiting state agencies' ability to impose penalties for future employer violations. Okay, so that's a particularly kind of devious thing right there as well, because what that's basically saying, and we'll see with articles that I'll show you, is that the slap on the wrist that these companies get for infractions and repeat infractions is not enough to change their habits and make them do the right thing. So this is actually kind of, in a way, permitting them to get away with committing child labor violations, because they still end up making more money after paying the fines than if they were to actually hire an adult and pay them fairly. Okay, so let me see. Okay, so multiple provisions in the new state law conflict with the federal Fair Labor Standards Act, prohibitions on oppressive child labor that includes hazardous conditions or excessive hours that interfere with teen schooling or health and well-being. Okay, so oppressive child labor, not mincing words there. So let's go into this. I'm going to go to table 1. Give me 1 second here. So let's talk about some of this stuff. And this is just Iowa, but you know, this is kind of setting a trend in my opinion, because we'll see some other stuff in other states. But you can see, as they mentioned, laundering using machines with a capacity of over 10 or more cubic feet. So these are industrial laundry machines. Used to not be permitted at all for 14 or 15-year-olds, and now it's 14-year-olds. And then loading or unloading equipment into motor vehicles up to 30 or 50 pounds. It used to be completely prohibited for kids under 16, and now it's 15. And you see this thing that says with a waiver from state agency. That's just like that's BS, because the state wants cheaper labor, so they're not going to push back on that stuff. Oh, you know, like you want this job? Okay, great. We're happy to like provide you with this work and pay you less money than an adult. So going through this a little bit more, you can see commercial motor vehicle driver and helper prohibited under 18, and now it's 16 years old. So significant difference there. Light assembly work in or about facilities manufacturing or storing explosives or articles containing explosive elements. This used to be prohibited under 18, and now it's 16. So you can see like really fucking dangerous shit. Like imagine a kid going to high school and, you know, working until 2 a.m., going to school at freaking 8 a.m. in the morning. You're like, yeah, I just got off of work of freaking demo. Like that's freaking crazy. That's freaking crazy. Like kids are gonna like what? And now that I think about it, kids will just end up skipping school and dropping out of school. So this goes back to the earlier point where kids have less opportunity because they're getting shit shuffled into these jobs, these like really, really high risk, very, very physically demanding jobs, that they're going to be so burnt out that they're not, a lot of them are, I think it's fair to say that as more data comes out and these things get worse, we're going to see things like a higher school dropout rates and lower higher education admission. So let's see what else we got here. Okay, so previously prohibited hazardous work allowed in new Iowa law if approved as work-based learning or school-based employer-administrated work-related program. So that's some more BS. They're basically trying to get around the law by saying, oh, well, you know, it's school credit. Oh, well, it's work credit. It's a work study program. And you can see like all this stuff is prohibited if you were under 18, okay? Stuff like operation of power-driven woodworking machines, power-driven hoisting apparatuses, power-driven metal forming, punching, and shearing machines. These are very, very like industrial, will take your freaking arm off machines, stuff that will kill you if used improperly. You can see all this stuff. These industrial machines used to be prohibited under 18, and now it's 16. And then they have the little kind of, if approved by state agency, but the only way they're not going to approve is if you're not able to meet the physical demands for it, I would think. That's kind of how I see it. You know, they want to pretend that they're going to have some sort of vetting process, but if you're 16 and you can lift 30 to 50 pounds, they're going to put you to fucking work. So let me get to table 2 here. This one's a little bit interesting. So the first one's that was just Iowa, and they focus on Iowa because they took a really broad stroke and kind of went for the jugular with children in a lot of different ways. But this is just stuff that's happened with kids in different states, in 14 different states over the last few years. So since 2021 to 2023. So in Arkansas, eliminates age verification and, well, this was enacted. So eliminates age verification and parent guardian permission requirements. So that's fucking insane. So a kid can just lie about their age, or be undocumented ostensibly because they don't have any age verification. I don't know how they get the age verification. And they also completely don't need parent guardian permission. This is something that also happened in Iowa as well. But, you know, ostensibly parents would want to have the final say on whether their kid works. And if, you know, kind of like how you see with the military going to school cafeterias and trying to get you to recruit, what's to stop corporations like Cargill or something from going to schools and trying to hire kids while they're still in school, similar to how armies do it, similar to how the military does it, and being able to hire kids on the spot, you know, without having to get them to go to their parents is actually a really big, it might sound like not a big deal, but it is kind of a big deal because most parents would want to know if their kid took a fucking dangerous job on. So Georgia tried to introduce it. It was withdrawn. We saw some of the stuff with Iowa. And then in Maine, they introduced this year a sub minimum wage for youth. So that's what I was talking about. So instead of paying what we already know, the minimum wage, I don't know what it is in Maine. But we know the federal minimum wage is $7.75. So, you know, whatever minimum wage is in Maine, they're saying that they can have an additional sub minimum wage that's less money for kids. That was introduced. It wasn't passed, but that's something that they're looking into. And then extends work hours for some homeschooled youth during school year. So it seems a little minor, but I actually knew a lot of homeschooled kids when I was growing up that were college bound. So that's a little bit, I don't know, kind of a, I don't know what to make of that, but I'd be more concerned about the sub minimum wage for youth. And let's also keep in mind, yes, they are all only introduced, but as we see inflation only get worse and we see corporations flex their lobbying power, you know, we know these things are more likely to get passed as the conditions worsen for the capitalists. Unfortunately, like, things aren't going to get better for the workers because, like, the capitalists are threatened. That's not how it works in this country. You know, in Michigan, they enacted both of these things last year. Lowers age to work at liquor stores, lowers age to serve alcohol. So liquor stores, this is actually kind of a big one, I think, because liquor stores is a pretty like entry level position. I mean, I worked at a liquor store when I was 18, and like the idea that they can have, I'm guessing 18, 21. I don't know how old you have to be in Maine to work at a liquor store, but lowering the age for a job that is generally like an entry level or very low skill is very harmful for fucking average adult. They're basically saying that they're going to take entry level jobs and replace them with children, and so that they can drive labor costs down. Minnesota introduced a couple bills, lift restrictions on hazardous work and extend working hours. So they want to get kids in industrial mills as well. Missouri eliminate work certificate requirements for 16 and 17-year-olds. They introduced. Nebraska introduced a sub-minimum wage for youth just this year. New Hampshire, this was enacted last year, lowers age to bus tables where alcohol is served and extend work hours. So the extending work hours might sound minor, but you're now taking something that, assuming that it used to be maybe it was spilling like 20 or 30 hours a week. Maybe now it's, 30 and 40 hours a week. Now it's like a full time for children now. So, these little things add up. And especially when you consider it's a scale that's either statewide or, something across the entire country, when they're extending hours for children over, thousands of kids, or, that's displayed. That's a lot of money saved for the capitalists in this way. You can look at it that way. In New Jersey, they enacted last year extended work hours, increases time before break. So they made it so that kids have to work longer hours between breaks, and they can have longer shifts as well. This was put into law last year. So Ohio passed in the Senate extending work hours. So you can see that extending work hours, some minimum wage, these things were kind of really common things that they tried to push through because they seem kind of tepid. But at scale, this is kind of detrimental because it is going to displace a lot of fucking adults who are trying to feed their family and who have kids. Like I just always have this image of the family dinner table where like the adult, the man lost his job to a child, and there's, the father has a kid at the dinner table who's working, and is able to work and got hired because they are taking a lower wage than the adults. It's just it's a really, really tragic situation. These are like stories that are going to happen. Like, I don't see how this is like a socially healthy thing. So I talked about this a little bit, but I kind of want to touch upon this again. So again, the thing with reduction in ages is a hidden modifier to combat inflation, as well as the function of our system, because lowering the ages increases the supply of workers, so it drives down labor costs. Okay, so this is going to have an adverse reaction, an adverse impact on the labor force. That like you can't blame the kids, but like this is just something that's going to happen. The government would rather have children taking adult jobs for reduced pay than try and change the system, either through nationalization, socialization, et cetera, et cetera. So also what I think is also profound is that these laws are actually an indictment on capitalism, because it shows that these industries actually need child labor to continue profiting. Now, I did also mention the inflation aspect, and I don't like to go too much into that because I feel like if we just try and address inflation with labor, we're kind of leaving out the social solutions to it, like taxing the fuck out of billionaires out of existence, or nationalization, as I mentioned. But it would address inflation in a way. I don't know if it's marginal. I'm not an economist, but it would potentially address it if this is something that hits scale, which I think it will. But yeah, I don't know how any capitalist can look at this and see us lowering the age requirements and think that that's not like an indictment on our system. Like, we should be encouraging kids to pursue higher education. We should be pursuing kids to, uh, you know, work on their education, work on like them being kids and not having to prop up our failing society. Um, the other thing that this kind of like shows to me is it kind of feels like our system is kind of going past its expiration date again. So there's these things like lowering the child labor, eroding child labor is just another thing where, I guess if you're a capitalist and you look at it, you just see it like, oh well, the kid can choose to work or not. The adult can choose whether to, let their kid work or not. Maybe they'll be motivated and move up the corporate ladder, blah, 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 blah. But they're not really seeing that a functioning society, wouldn't be encouraging children to work more. They would be encouraging them to, focus on their skills, focus on their education, focus on their like socialization. And I don't know how people like completely miss that element, and not make that distinction. And I also want to say, like, I think we all pretty much know that the state would refuse to do anything that's going to threaten capital, such as nationalizing these industries or taxing the fuck out of these corporations and oligarchs. Like, that stuff's not going to happen. So with that being said, I just want to repeat again, I think these things are going to get worse, not better. As I see our society and our economy like kind of like clamoring to survive and keep relevance, as we see things like de-dollarization and we see BRICS and stuff like that I haven't even talked about really on the show. These are the kind of desperate measures that our system is doing to try and compete on not only just the federal level, but on the global level. Okay. So it's a very scary time, I think, because now I'm just seeing a desperate society. I'm not read enough in Marx or economic theory to really articulate like how these things are getting so bad and how it's only going to get worse. But I can definitely see that our country is not doing anything to actually protect labor, and so it's only going to get worse, in my opinion. So I'm just going to take a look at this really quick. So with that being said, I think I kind of wrapped up a little bit on that EPI there. So what I wanted to do is kind of go into some anecdotes and just show you guys some of the like these names that you guys know of, these huge companies, franchises that are doing the most depraved shit. So to start off with, I got an article here. Give me 1 second. Let's see. Give me 1 second here. Where are you? The slaughterhouse. Where are you? Sorry, give me 1 second here. Okay, there it is. Okay. So, U.S. investigation uncovers 2 10-year-olds working at Kentucky McDonald's. You guys might have heard this story. It came out May 3rd, a couple months ago. You may have heard it when it happened. But I just kind of this was one of the things I just kind of kept in the back of my head. But the U.S. Department of Labor investigation uncovered child labor violations at 3 McDonald's locations in Kentucky, which included finding 2 10-year-olds working unpaid, sometimes until 2 a.m. So that's freaking insane. The 3 McDonald's franchisees cited in the investigation own a total of 62 locations across Kentucky, Indiana, Maryland, and Ohio, and were found to employ 305 children working more than legally permitted hours and performing job tasks prohibited by law for their age. And I actually have let me actually pull this up really quick. So I actually have the Department of Labor thing right there. So I'll pull this up. So, and this is actually just shocking to me. So you can see 3 McDonald's franchisees in Kentucky pay $212,000 in fines after federal investigations find 305 minors, including 10-year-olds, working illegally. So I just kind of wanted to go over the headline because what really sticks out to me is the 212,000 in fines. So what's going on here is you can kind of see they hired 305 minors. Okay, so let's just think about that for a second. 305 minors. Maybe they were like, hey, man, I'll give you freaking $8-10 an hour, whatever. And they're like, great, I'm fucking stoked, you know? And so that 212,000, when you consider all the adults that they didn't hire who would have been demanding stuff like 16, 18, 20, so on and so forth, that they didn't hire, that 212 is the cost of doing business. You know, they look at that fine and they're like, okay, cool. Ooh, you caught us. I guess we'll be a little bit careful not to be so obvious next time. So it's important to keep in mind that these fines, like I'm of the opinion, you know, that if you're employing children, that like your business shouldn't exist. That if you're that kind of guy who's going to employ 10-year-olds to flip hamburgers, like you like should be either fined to make it where you're basically out of existence, or like where you're not going to do it again. You know, 212,000 for 305 minors is a drop in the bucket. You know, I don't know the math on that, but they came out on top. And unfortunately, this is really consistent. So let's see. Dr. Nick Riviera says we're paying off their debts to the Coyotes. So that's kind of an interesting thing to look at. I would say it's probably a little bit more complex than that, just because there's so many different hands that are going like in that line that are going to paying off the Coyotes. You know, the people who are paying off the Coyotes are generally like the people on the other side of the border, you know, save up all their money. But I'm not that invested in like that kind of like element of that to go down that rabbit hole tonight. But I could see something like that is happening. You know, or another thing that is happening. Okay, I'll reframe it a little bit because this is something that is happening. Is that a lot of kids, and because you mentioned this, I'm actually bringing this up a little bit later. But what happens is a lot of kids am getting picked up by dubious, basically adults who are supposed to be looking over their care, and get put into you know, some sort of either indentured servitude or straight up slavery, you know, right after they cross the border. And that's how they kind of pay off their debt. So that's another way it occurs. And I'll get more into that in a little bit here. But like one of the ways that does sort of happen, they pay off their debts, is literally through slavery. So I just wanted to highlight that, you know, these fines aren't doing anything. We see these numbers, 212 in fines, and we as normal, like, you know, workers see that, and that's a big number to us. But one McDonald's, if you're not making $1 million, $2 million a year, is suffering. Okay, so the idea that they, you know, between three franchises is 212, it's not really a big deal. A McDonald's does not, like, you have a McDonald's, like, before you even get the McDonald's, they're looking at the location. They're going to make sure that it's going to be profitable. It's pretty much turnkey. Like, I'm not saying that there's not a little bit of you know, growing pains associated with opening a business, but if you got like what I think you need like $1.5 million liquid to open a McDonald's or something like that, you'll make $1 million a year. You know, so again, drop in the bucket. These guys are total clowns. So let me see what I can go to next here. Okay, so actually this is good now because Riviera was talking a little bit about the child migrants, so I can start bringing up some of that stuff. Give me 1 second here. Okay. Oh, cool. Glad we saw somebody who saw. I'm actually talking about this stuff because of Sound of Freedom. I've been sitting on this stuff for a long time, and I was like, oh, the Sound of Freedom's talking about child trafficking. I'm going to talk about child labor because it's important. So talk a little bit about kind of the undocumented immigrant crisis. I know I was talking about just documented people, kind of like legislation, kind of hurting the documented American, child citizens. There's a whole element of this that's even harder to kind of quantify at how bad it is. That's through the migrant child labor. So again, New York fucking Times. Okay, guys, this is as mainstream as it fucking gets. So this isn't some like backwoods publication. Yes, they're not showing this stuff on CNN and MSNBC. You're not seeing this stuff on TV, but even New York Times is putting out this stuff. So a couple paragraphs I wanted to read from this article. So as migrant children were put to work, U.S. ignored warnings. So the White House and federal agencies were repeatedly alerted to signs of children at risk. The warnings were ignored or missed. So that's kind of my take, as I've been saying, that like they're pretending that they're going to put safeguards in, like, oh, you need a note from the agency, or like we're going to make sure that kids have some protections. Like obviously, like kids are getting lost in the system. So let's highlight some of this stuff with some of these paragraphs. So Miss Brandmiller's job was to help vet sponsors, and she has been trained to look for possible trafficking. In her first week, 2 cases jumped out. One man told her he was sponsoring 3 boys to employ them at a construction company. It's not even hiding the fact that he's just doing child slavery. Another, who lived in Florida, was trying to sponsor 2 children who would have to work off the coast to bring in the north. She immediately contacted supervisors working with the Department of Health and Human Services, the federal agency responsible for these children. This is urgent, she wrote in an email reviewed in the New York Times. But within days, she noticed that one of the children was set to be released to the man in Florida. She wrote another email, this time asking for a supervisor's immediate attention, adding that the government had already sent a 14-year-old boy to the same sponsor. Ms. Brandmiller also emailed the shelter's manager. A few days later, her building access was revoked during her lunch break. She said she was never told why she had been fired. Flying too close to the sun, trying to draw attention to illegal, undocumented child labor. And what happens is person who's doing her job gets fired. Okay, so I'm not trying to be like the cynical as a vibe here. It's just what I see. I don't think that our institutions are acting in good faith and doing anything to protect children at this point. Okay, so let me see. So over the past 2 years, let me see. Give me 1 second here. I just want to see. Oh yeah, there we go. So over the past 2 years, more than 250,000 migrant children have come alone to the United States. Thousands of children have ended up punishing jobs across the country, working overnight in slaughterhouses, replacing roofs, operating machinery in factories, all in violation of child labor laws, a recent Times investigation showed. After the article's publication in February, the White House announced policy changes and a crackdown on companies that hire children. But all along, there were signs of the explosive growth of this labor force and warnings that the Biden administration ignored or missed, the Times had found. So this is just, the New York Times doesn't get much liberal than this, is saying that the Biden administration is failing, migrant child labor. Okay. And on top of that, they're even saying their policy changes and crackdown, like it's just lip service. It doesn't mean anything. And this also, I just wanted to bring that up, that even the New York Times is saying that the Biden administration doesn't give a fuck about children. Okay. So I think that's like a pretty clear indictment. Although if you're a liberal reading this, you just be like, oh no, like that's so sad. They should do more about it. But I think this is more by design than them just like being incompetent. As kind of a sidebar, like I don't know if people have heard the term of like Hanlon's razor, don't attribute to malice, where you can attribute to incompetence. But as I'm doing this show and I'm like reading more about this stuff and I kind of get into like deeper topics and do investigations, I think that's like mostly bullshit, that, you know, the people in power seem to be acting maliciously more often than not, and deliberately. And the major reason I think that is because the mode of production that we're in relies heavily on the legislation and the Biden administration turning a blind eye, or, you know, not really paying attention. Okay, because if capitalism fails, the system collapses, it's time to go to socialism, and like, can't have none of that. So I think that's kind of why I'm more on the side of cynicism than ignorance, because you wouldn't accidentally end up with the system that we have through sheer incompetence. You know, what, like, the system should have failed 100 years ago, and it didn't. That was actually a point I was going to bring up, was like, Marx predicted that after monopoly capitalism, like 100 years ago, that things were just going to, like, we were going to go to socialism, and it didn't happen. Instead, we got financial capitalism. So, you know, these, I don't think that's incompetence. I think these people are, like, deliberately trying to keep the gravy train going for their, you know, extremely rich friends. So I'll highlight that there. Go to this next article. Give me 1 second here, guys. So, you know, I know I'm super cynical, but, you know, if the New York Times is saying it, I'm inclined to, like what can, like, how else do you take that? All right, so here's another New York Times article. Okay. Scroll to the top here. Give me 1 second. So this one's even sadder. So alone and exploited, migrant children work brutal jobs across the U.S. Arriving in record numbers, they're ending up in dangerous jobs that violate child labor laws, including in factories that make products for well-known brands like Cheetos and Fruit of the Loom. So for whatever reason, these pictures aren't here, but you can see the 13-year-old they took a picture of. So let me see. Okay. The factory was full of underage workers like Carolina, who had crossed the southern border by themselves and were now spending late hours bent over hazardous machinery in violation of child labor laws. At nearby plants, other children were tending giant ovens to make Chewy and Nature Valley granola bars and packing bags of Lucky Charms and Cheetos, all of them working for the processing giant's Hearthside Food Solutions, which would ship these products across the country. So New York Times just saying out loud that, like, we're hiring, like, these plants that make the cereal that we eat and the granola bars that we eat, hire migrant child labor, like, no problem. Sometimes I get tired and feel sick, Carolina said after a shift in November. Her stomach often hurt, and she was unsure if that was because of the lack of sleep, the stress from incessant roar of the machines, or the worries she had for herself and her family in Guatemala. But I'm getting used to it. Okay, so let's see. Okay. Largely from Central America, the children are driven by economic desperation that was worsened by the pandemic. This labor force has been slowly growing for almost a decade, but it has exploded since 2021, while the system was meant to protect children have broken down. So just driving that home, that there was growth in child labor in 2016 that they were actually seeing. Instead of it going down, they were seeing it actually get worse from 2016 on. And then once the pandemic happened, there hasn't been any new studies yet, but like you can guarantee that things have just gotten even more worse, or things have gotten even worse for children, and since the pandemic, for sure. So let's see. Okay, so okay, give me 1 second here. I'm just looking at my notes here. Child benefits. Okay. Okay, so the Times spoke with more than 100 migrant child workers in 20 states to describe jobs that were grinding them into exhaustion and fears that had become trapped in circumstances they never could have imagined. The Times examination also drew on court and inspection records and interviews with hundreds of lawyers, social workers, educators, and law enforcement officials. In town after town, children scrub dishes late at night. They run milking machines in Vermont, deliver meals in New York City. They harvest coffee and build lava rock walls around the vacation homes in Hawaii. Girls as young as 13 wash hotel sheets in Virginia. In many parts of country, middle and high school teachers and English language learner programs now say it's common for nearly all their students to rush off the long shifts after their classes end. Okay, migrant child labor benefits both from under-the-table operations and global corporations. So this touches a little bit on what Dr. Riviera was saying earlier, asked earlier. The Times found in Los Angeles, children stitch Made in America tags into J. Crew shirts. They bake dinner rolls sold at Walmart and Target, processed milk used in Ben & Jerry's ice cream, and help debone chicken sold at Whole Foods. As recently as the fall, middle schoolers made Fruit-of-the-Loom socks in Alabama. In Michigan, children make auto parts used by Ford and General Motors. The number of unaccompanied minors entering the United States climbed to a high of 130,000 last year, 3 times what it was 5 years earlier, and this summer is expected to bring another wave. These are not children who have stolen into the country undetected. The federal government knows they are in the United States, and the Department of Health and Human Services is responsible for ensuring sponsors will support them and protect them from trafficking or exploitation. So this is really important. Like, these kids are, they get some sort of documentation. Okay, they come in through whatever means. They end up getting some sort of documentation through Health and Human Services. But then as we read on, as more and more children have arrived, the Biden White House has ramped up demands on staffers to move the children quickly out of shelters and release them to adults. Caseworkers say they rush through vetting sponsors. While HHS checks on all minors by calling them a month after they begin living with their sponsors, data obtained by the Times showed that over the last 2 years, the agency could not reach more than 85,000 children. Overall, the agency lost immediate contact with a third of the migrant children. So I just kind of want to say really clearly, my kind of take on that is, again, kind of by design. Yes, like Biden says, let's like kind of rush them through, get them out of, like, vet them faster to get them, get them with these like support adults. But missing a third of the children within a month, like that's not a couple going through the cracks. That's like an administrative policy. Okay, I look at something like that and it's like, there's guidance on that. 1 out of 3, that's insane. That's like, I'd be fired from my job if I was like, if you had a failure rate for 1 out of 3 of whatever you were supposed to do, that's like fucking significant. But yet, like, these people still have jobs. So I think, again, kind of goes back to what I'm saying. It's part of the program. Sadly, it's a feature. It's not a bug. When you consider the things like that they are harping on and they're trying to address these things, this is like the hidden modifier to try and address some of the systemic issues that are some of the contradictions that are inherent in our system. Okay. Oh, like, the adults want money so that they can live and they can support themselves and have a few things. And like, the capitalists aren't willing to give it to them. So they're going to hire child labor, and they're going to hire child migrant labor. So even worse than we were seeing with the legislation that was showing sub minimum wages, this is sub minimum wages. This is the worst fucking shit ever. I don't know if it's pennies or whatever, but like, this is like basic slavery. So I really wanted to illustrate that with this article in particular, that there's kids who have sponsors, okay, who have Health and Human Services caseworkers, but a third of them just end up getting lost in the system. Now, I'm not trying to like, put an indictment on like the immigration crisis or anything. Like, that's not what I'm trying to talk about here. All I'm focusing on is that just seems like not just a failure, but almost like an intended failure, because it's so significant. That's like, oh, here's a stack of papers, just throw out every third piece of paper, with this documented child. You don't have time for that shit. Just forget about it. It just seems like there's an active effort to get more kids into the system so that they can be exploited by more businesses. That's kind of how it occurs to me. So I just wanted to show you that we have professionals who are supposed to be doing their jobs who are not. So we'll pull this up. Here's another good one here from the New Yorker. Check my comments really quick. So E. Heller had kind of an interesting question here, and this is actually a topic that I'm kind of actively kind of just starting to do research on, because I'm starting to see stuff on AI, and I used to be all for AI, and I'm like pretty against it at this point. But E. Heller asked, which is going to replace more adults, child labor, or AI or robots? I think the end game is AI and like the kind of humanoid stuff. I think that's absolutely the end game. But I don't think it's going to work out the way that the people who are going to do that think it's going to work out. You know, like let's put it this way. Technically with AI, the surplus value, I guess you could look at as infinity potentially, because there's no cost associated. You don't have to pay that AI. So if I was a business owner, I'd be more incentivized to take on AI and take on, robots that can do this stuff, and all I'm paying for is electricity, than like hiring an actual person. Now, unfortunately, like that's kind of what I see happening. But like I said, this is like a subject that I'm just starting to get more into, so I'll be talking more about that stuff as the stuff worsens, of course, and as I'm like more aware of it. There was a conference recently about AI and kind of like what is happening across the world, and so I'm waiting for some videos for some demons to kind of come out so I can kind of like critique some of that stuff. But this stuff is definitely starting to become, I think, more important. Like, I think we're still a little bit ahead of the curve on talking about AI, but I think it's a technology that's accelerating so quickly that by the time everybody's talking about AI, it's going to be too late. Snow Himbo, maybe you actually have an answer for this, okay? Because this is something that I think about. So with AI and thinking that it could be like have infinite surplus value, okay? What I'm having trouble understanding, and maybe you can help me with this, maybe you can help people in the chat with this, is that they have to know that by trying to be so greedy and taking on, a machine that they can get infinite surplus value out of, that it's actually negative surplus value because they're displacing a worker. So that's how I see it. Maybe they just think that there's going to be some way that, they're going to give us like, this is kind of like the UBI argument, that it makes more sense for them to have AI and have useless leaders living off $1,000 a month than actually hire people. But that's where I see that contradiction. Like, they're going to be encouraged to pay for AI and adopt AI, but at the same time, it's displacing workers, and there's nothing putting the brakes and protecting workers who are going to be displaced by that. So I think that's kind of like an interesting contradiction that I don't know how to kind of wrap my head around. Like, if I was a capitalist, I'd be like, wait a second, this is going to catch up with us. If I hire, AI to do all my programming instead of do all my work instead of 10,000 agents, well, now there's 10,000 agents who have no job. That's going to have a freaking rippling effect on our entire country. And as soon as like one company does freaking as soon as, like, imagine freaking Comcast, okay, just decides that they're going to replace all their customer service with freaking AI. So when you call 1-800-COMCAST, you're getting a fucking bot. Okay, they do that, they wipe out freaking 15,000, 20,000 jobs immediately. Okay, well, Comcast did it. What's stopping Walmart from doing it? What's stopping Amazon from doing it? What's stopping all these fucking huge companies from doing it? So that's, yeah, and Easy Heller says they already have to some degree, but I think it's just gonna like accelerate in a way that, like, we cannot wrap our heads around how fast like AI is going to completely dominate industry in general. So I'm very, very, very pessimistic of it, and I don't think people are prepared to like pump the brakes on it, and I don't think people are prepared for how it's going to be. I just want to read Snow Himbo's comment really quick. It will infinitely worsen the biggest contradiction of capitalism, the decrease in purchasing power, would cannibalize their profits to an unbelievable degree. Okay, that's interesting. I'm going to chew on that a little bit. But to kind of get back to some more articles here. Okay, so this is stuff. So another one. Yeah, that's funny. So you could argue that as kind of like an acceleration thing. Like, please give us the AI because it's just going to displace, 200 million workers, and then what? But unfortunately, I think what's going to happen is at that point they're more likely to kind of try and convert us into a more feudalist mode of production at that point than us actually having an opportunity for revolution. So let me pull up this article. Okay, so here's another one I wanted to bring up. So again, New Yorker, like this is some professional managerial class, liberal stuff, as liberal as it gets. Child labor is on the rise. This is from a month ago, June 4th. Okay, state legislators across the country are making it easier to hire minors in low-paid and dangerous jobs. So I just wanted to go over a particularly interesting paragraph in here. So again, this is as mainstream as it gets for print. Okay. And then just to highlight a particular segment in here, the reasons offered to justify these initiatives often emphasize child welfare. So this is like the double thing, thinking that it's a good thing. In Ohio, where Republican legislators are also proposing weaker laws, a spokesman for the Ohio Restaurant Association testified that extending work hours for minors would cut down on their screen time. Okay. The lawmakers offered a concurrent resolution urging Congress to lower federal child labor standards to conform with Ohio's proposed rules. Arkansas's Republican governor, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, recently signed a law ending a requirement that 14 and 15-year-olds obtain a parent's consent and a state permit before starting work, linking the bill strangely to parental rights. The governor's office called the permit an arbitrary burden on parents. So just the mental backflips you can see, and that's just. I mean, I've talked about this stuff a little bit with some other stuff, but it just really highlights the depravity where they will say anything to convince you that child labor is good. There's no good argument to have 14 and 15-year-olds who should be in high school, going around like, and this gets back to like not needing the parental consent. I like strongly believe that it's only a matter of time. If they're not doing it already, where there's corporations in freaking high schools and middle schools just be like, hey, I'll hire you on the spot. You can start Friday. Oh, yeah, your parents don't need to know about that. Oh, yeah, the bus will actually drop you off there. We have an arrangement with your bus where they'll drop you off at the factory after school. Like, these things are going to happen. So, when people look at this stuff unironically and think like, the libertarians always kind of make these bad faith arguments where it's like, oh, it's giving them like, good opportunity for work experience, and it's giving them valuable like, work time and teaching them a valuable skill, and they can have a trade, and they can pursue a career whenever they should be able to pursue a career whenever they want. And it's just completely bad. Or, for what it's worth, there are people who have like really surface level understandings of this and don't get, kind of as we said earlier, that putting kids to work at earlier ages actually gives them less opportunity down the line because they're less likely to pursue higher education. That's just facts. So let's see what else we got here. Okay. So I wanted to show some more. Like it gets even worse, guys. So this is the most mainstream publications. Like what was kind of shocking to me when I was reading through this stuff is like, how can I look at this stuff and come across this stuff so easily, and it's not in the cultural hegemony. It's not in the mainstream discourse. Like, this is like a huge deal. You would think liberals would be like up in arms over child labor and migrant child labor. You would think they would just like be like ready to protest over that shit. No, they're not. Like, not a fucking peep. So let's see. There's some more. It gets even worse here, guys. So give me 1 second here. Okay. So Okay, over 100 children illegally employed by U.S. slaughterhouse cleaning firms. So remember, I said I've been looking at this stuff for a few months, but it's really not hard to see that this stuff's like it's 2 articles from The Guardian, 2 articles from the New York Times, 1 from the New Yorker. Like, not hard to find this stuff. And this is all within a relatively short period of time. You know, beginning of the year, not even last 3-4 months. You're seeing these articles coming out all the time. 100 children illegally employed by U.S. slaughterhouse cleaning firm. Remember, I just showed you that other article. 300 minors working at fucking McDonald's. So more than Labor Department investigation finds Packer Sanitation Services Incorporated employed children between the ages of 13 and 17 in 8 states. More than 100 children have been discovered to be illegally employed by a slaughterhouse cleaning firm across the country, federal authorities said. The Department of Labor, give me 1 second here. The Department of Labor announced that a federal investigation found Wisconsin-based Packer Sanitation Services Incorporated employed at least 102 children ranging from 13 to 17 years old to work overnight shifts at 13 meat processing facilities in 8 states. The investigation discovered that children were working with hazardous chemicals and cleaning meat processing equipment, including back saws, brisket saws, and head splitters. No idea what any of that shit is, but it sounds like it will fucking tear your head off and will like completely amputate you if you're not careful. That stuff sounds dangerous as hell. At least 3 minors suffered injuries while working for PSSI, one of the country's largest food safety sanitation service providers. The state in which the children were employed includes Arkansas, Colorado, my state, blue state, Indiana, Kansas, Minnesota, Nebraska, Tennessee, and Texas. The processor, which had the largest number of employed minors, is JBS Foods, with 27 children employed, followed by Cargill, fucking enormous, like I think they're one of the biggest food distributors in our country, if not the biggest, which had 26 employed children. Other processors include Tyson, as in Tyson Chicken, Tyson Food, George's Incorporated, Buckhead Meat of Minnesota, Gibbon Packaging Co., Greater Omaha Packaging Co., Maple Leaf Farms, and Turkey Valley Farms. So, again, like these are not like little names, and these are all part of the food chain that like we cannot when people say that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, this is kind of like when you go deep enough, this is what you get to. Like it's impossible to get away from these industries or any part of the production process if you don't have your own farm that's not touched by some sort of depravity or some sort of degenerate policy. And like just to kind of show a little bit of a cynical element to this, you know, I've spoken about this on the other show that I do with Greg, Politically Homeless. But about a month or so ago, I did a thing on like the CEI scores, the equity and inclusion, was the something equality and inclusion score. So one of the scores kind of goes with ESG, where they're basically trying to gaslight people to think that these companies are doing all these great things and are really all about equality and helping people out and doing all these great things. Well, let's just look at Cargill, which we just saw had employed indirectly. You know, you can argue indirectly, but they had 26 children employed in one of their factories. Okay, let's look at Cargill's CEI score. Okay, their equality and inclusion score. Oh, it's 100. Oh, that's crazy. Oh, well, who cares about the child labor? They got 100 score. Human Rights Campaign. What? They gave him 100 score? Oh, they must be awesome. So complete joke. Okay, I'm not trying to go through all these companies, but you can look and go like just Google like Human Rights Campaign CEI scores. You can put in these scores like Tyson Foods, stuff like that. You'll see that they all got like high scores, but that's an obfuscation. You know, on top of getting into a whole nother topic about reputational value and trying to quantify it. This is also an obfuscation in being like, oh, look at the bright, shiny object here that we have our CI score of 100 and ignore the New Yorker and the New York Times articles highlighting that we have child labor in our factories. Don't pay attention to that. Pay attention to the fact that we are LGBTQ inclusive. So super cynical, but again, I don't know how else to look at it, you know, and I feel bad for our brothers and sisters kind of fall for their shit, to be honest. But I don't think that, I don't know how you can see that Cargill, who employs children, can still have 100 score and not see the cynicism there. So let's see what else we got here. I think I'm kind of wrapping up a little bit here. Oh yeah, this one's kind of funny. So a couple other things here, kind of a shorter thing today, but I did kind of want to highlight a couple more anecdotes really quick. So this is, like, you can see another thing to kind of keep in mind as I was exploring this is these are not like the service industries. Okay, this is like heavy industrial industries. This is like meat packing, food processing, like the stuff that will fucking kill you. The stuff that's really dangerous, the stuff that's really like heavy, like manual labor, very intensive, factory line kind of shit. So here's just another article here. Let's see. Okay. So Labor Department nabs another child labor violator. This was just a few days ago. Okay. Child labor violations of employing minors have cost a Minnesota meat plant 30 grand in fines imposed by U.S. Department of Labor. This is the latest in fines for the meat industry paid for its child labor practices. Tennessee-based Monogram Meat Snacks accused of employing minors at its production plant in Chandler, Minnesota. Labor Department investigators found 2 underage employees at Monogram, Minnesota plant on March 28. Children at risk for injury and pose a threat to food safety when cleaning equipment. The plant employs 400 and produces meat snacks, including refrigerated sausages. Monogram also runs the Monogram Foods Loves Kids Foundation. Like, what the fuck? Monogram Foods Loves Kids Foundation, which claims to raise funds for children's charities in the communities where it operates. Oh, so they hire children, they pay the fine, they have kids working in freaking illegal labor conditions. Oh, but Monogram Foods loves children, that Loves Kids Foundation. So just I'm sorry, but the incredible cynicism is just that, like, I can't get over it. I can't get over it. It's so obvious. Like, oh, we know that we have that child labor is just the cost of doing business, but the other cost of doing business is having a philanthropic organization that pretends to do the exact opposite. And I think that's kind of a bigger theme, which I'm not really going to get into tonight, but very often philanthropy kind of hides, like, this is like a really stark example, but very often philanthropy hides the nefarious activity happening to an organization. This is just a really clear example of it. So again, like 30 grand, great. They were paying these kids freaking $5, $6 an hour, and they were stoked about it. So 30 grand is a drop in the bucket for them. Okay. Normally, people to work in these factories, they could be union jobs. If they're union jobs, they could be getting freaking 25, 30, 40 bucks an hour. Going from there, they're making their money hand over fist. Oh, 30 grand for 2 kids. Oh, all day. We'll be a little bit more careful. We'll put them in stilts next time. So just total joke. That's like main point of that article is just drive home again. Like these fines are not meant to encourage these businesses to change their behavior. It's just meant to be a slap on the wrist. It's just meant to be like, hey, like, be a little bit careful about hiding your ass more. So, you're never going to find me trying to give these guys benefit of the doubt anymore. And kind of just to kind of wrap up with this topic a little bit before I get into my kind of closing statements on this a little bit. I just wanted to show, kind of bringing it full circle, because like, in the beginning I said, like, oh, people like to say it's the red states, doing this, it's the red states doing that. Here we go with California Democrats block bill to make child trafficking a serious felony. This was fucking, it's today the 13th. Yeah, this is today. Okay. So we can just see a Democrat majority committee in the California State Assembly has declined to advance a bill that would make child trafficking a serious felony in the Golden State. Democrats on the Assembly Public Safety Committee decided not to advance the proposed legislation on Tuesday in a move that could mean the bill won't pass into law this year. Republican Senator Shannon Grove introduced a bill which passed with unanimous bipartisan support in the state Senate and would classify child trafficking as a serious felony, making that offense subject to a state's 3 strikes rule. Under that rule, a person convicted of at least 3 serious felonies is punished with prison sentence of between 25 years and life. Okay, so what's kind of interesting about this and what I took away from this, and I think that's kind of what Newsweek was trying to illustrate, was that this is basically the Democrats. Like, we know that industry has repeat offenders for child labor in California. Like, the state legislature knows that they have repeat offenders of this, and they're not planning on stopping it anytime soon. So instead of protecting children, they're saying no. If we actually like protect children, then my fucking donors are going to be behind bars. Can't fucking do that. Can't fucking do that. So that's how I see it. Now, I don't know how you could look at something like this and come across with thinking that, oh, this is too heavy-handed. Like, imagine being fucking politician and being like, oh man, like, we're being too hard on those corporations that are taking advantage of our youth. Like, the mental gymnastics to think that saying something like that is on the right side of history is just absurd. So it's just crazy to me, the insane mental backflips that are happening on both sides. Like, don't get me wrong, but California is particularly, it's just funny because California, very, very big economically, very big geologically, very big democratic as far as like a Democrat stronghold. And here they are saying, oh, we don't want to apply 3 strikes to our industry titans in California because then they'll end up in jail. Like, we can't do that. Like, just absurd. Just absurd. Like, they're just illustrating it so cleanly. So, I think that kind of illustrates tonight kind of the direction I wanted to show that, child labor is going to continue to get worse in this country. And I know I come across as like extremely cynical, but I think, like, even pulling up, you saw the mainstream articles I was pulling up, like, nothing particularly crazy. Like, I don't know how looking at these things and seeing the trends that I see and seeing the like what has to be malicious behavior, and the fact that our mode of production is falling apart. I don't know how you can look at this and not see that they're actively trying to keep our system afloat by driving down labor costs, okay, by hiring child labor, by making child labor more accessible. So with that, I guess that's kind of, I'm going to keep on top of this because I'm sure it's going to keep getting worse. But, I think the child labor is just another signal that things are not getting better. Things are not moving in the direction that they're supposed to. And that this is not the sign of a healthy society. Like, I don't know how people can look at these things propping up every couple of weeks and think, oh, like, we're kicking ass. Like, things are going great here. So, that's really what I wanted to illustrate tonight. So let me see if there's anything else I wanted to drive home. Again, like I was saying, the cynicism comes from seeing liberal articles posting this stuff and saying the quiet parts out loud. We saw that the New York Times was spelling out that Health and Human Services just looks the other way. 1/3 of the children just completely goes away and just disappears. And, and then we also talked a lot about how in introducing child labor, as we mentioned earlier, will actually decrease the opportunity for education down the line. And if you want to extrapolate that a step further, by introducing more child labor into our society, we're actually increasing poverty because those same children are less likely to go on and pursue higher education and pursue a more lucrative career path are going to be locked into a system, and they're going to perpetuate this system because they're going to turn into adults, and the same thing's going to happen. So this is kind of, unfortunately, a kind of like a self-perpetuating machine, and I don't really know how we get out of it. You know, it's just really unfortunate that I don't see anybody doing the right thing in this situation. I don't like, yeah, you can see on California that there was like legislature trying to introduce 3 strikes, but you know, like the Democrats are pushing back at it. That should have been like a slam dunk. Like, yes, like let's get these evil fucks, like stop, like let's be for the children. So you know, I don't see people doing the right thing in this situation. So unfortunately, I just see it getting worse. And you know, let's also keep in mind that when they're talking about inflation, that part of addressing inflation for these freaking degenerate motherfuckers in freaking DC is by using child labor, both documented child labor, citizens, American citizens under 18, and by using illegal child, like I don't like using legal, like undocumented migrant workers, migrant child labor. So, you know, thank you so much for tuning in, guys. I really appreciate it. I will be having my show on Monday. I know we got some more stuff to talk about with Greg. And with that being said, I'll see you guys again on Monday and then on Thursday. Have a great rest of the night, everybody.